When the Alien franchise was, well, becoming a franchise, successful sequels, let alone trilogies, were diamonds in the rough, with moviegoers frequently prejudging them as diminishing in quality with each project. For every Star Wars, Indiana Jones, and Back to the Future, there was a Jaws, Police Academy, and Friday the 13th.
You call him Dr. Jones.
But there was no doubt that after the critical and financial success of both Alien and Aliens, there would be a third movie. And while many fans and critics found Alien 3 to be inferior to the first two movies, its box office earnings and heroic end of the Ellen Ripley character would make this trilogy a success. And with the main character's story arc completed, it was a perfect place to end the story, and for that matter, the franchise as well. Almost. The truth is, the completion of the Alien trilogy was really just the launching point for 4 more movies, a couple of crossovers, and a streaming series. You see, in 1987, when work on Alien 3 began, it would ignite a desire to explore more of the Alien universe that even 3.5 decades later has yet only to scratch the surface on fans' questions about xenomorphs, the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, and the black ooze that seems to be at the center of everything. But the road to where we are today, from Alien 3 through Romulus and now with the Alien Earth streaming series, has included several U-turns, dead ends, and unexpected deviations. And this has left us with many questions. Why was the future legendary director of Alien 3 sabotaged during the making of his film? How was Newt almost the main character of Alien Resurrection? What made Ridley Scott want to go back to the beginning in Prometheus? Why didn't the android names continue following the alphabet in Alien Covenant? Why did they make Alien Romulus instead of finishing the prequel trilogy? And now that Disney owns the Alien franchise, where will it go in the future? Well, you are about to find out, because this is the definitive history of the Alien franchise, from Alien 3 through Romulus, and you've never heard it told like this before. And make sure you go back after this video and check out our definitive histories of Alien and Aliens linked at the end. And if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, please do so now, and give us a thumbs up if you want more videos like this. When Aliens finished its box office run at the end of 1986, the movie had earned as much as $183 million worldwide against an $18.5 million budget, and 20th Century Fox wanted more of where that came from. But when they approached their partner Brandywine Productions to do another sequel, the company's executives Walter Hill, David Giler, and Gordon Carroll weren't enthused about continuing the story in an Alien 3 project.
We weren't so, we were happy to do it, but we weren't all that enthused.
They didn't want to do a repeat of 1 and 2.
Because we thought, what do you do with this one to make it different?
They wanted to go in a totally new direction. They wanted to explore the Weyland-Yutani Corporation and why they were so intent on using the aliens as biological weapons. The studio and Brandywine agreed to discuss different concepts for a third installment, eventually settling on a 2-part story, with Michael Bihn's Corporal Hicks promoted to protagonist in the third film, and Sigourney Weaver's character of Ellen Ripley reduced to a cameo appearance before returning in the 4th installment.
Yes, there was a question of whether she wanted to do a third one.
There would be an epic battle with alien warriors mass-produced by expatriated Earthlings. Weaver liked the Cold War metaphor and agreed to a smaller role, particularly due to a dissatisfaction with Fox, who would remove scenes from Ripley's backstory in Aliens. We would learn in a later cut of the film that Ripley had a daughter that died while she was asleep for 57 years between Alien and Aliens. Although 20th Century Fox was skeptical about the idea, they agreed to finance the development of the story, but asked that Brandywine attempt to get Ridley Scott, the director of Alien, to make Alien 3. They also asked that these 2 films be shot back-to-back to lessen the production costs. While Scott was interested in returning to the franchise, it didn't work out due to the director's busy schedule working on Someone to Watch Over Me and Black Rain. So in September 1987, Giler and Hill from Brandywine approached cyberpunk author William Gibson to write the script for a third film. Gibson, who told the producers his writing was influenced by Alien, accepted the task. Gibson drew heavily from Giler and Hill's treatment, having a strong interest in the Marxist space empire element of it. The following year, Finnish director Renny Harlin was approached by Fox because of his work in A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. Harlan wanted to go in a different direction from the first two movies. He wanted to visit the alien homeworld and explore exactly what they were and if they were truly evil.
And maybe they are not born to be bad at all.
But the cost of doing that would have been too high. Harlan was also interested in the aliens coming to Earth. Gibson's story picked up after Aliens, with the Sulaco drifting into an area of space claimed by the Union of Progressive Peoples. The ship is boarded by people of the UPP, who are attacked by a facehugger hiding in the entrails of Bishop's mangled body. The soldiers blast the facehugger into space and take Bishop with them for further study. The Sulaco then arrives at a space station shopping mall hybrid named Anchor Point. With Ripley put in a coma, Hicks explores the station and discovers Weyland-Yutani are developing an alien army. In the meantime, the UPP are doing their own research, which led them to repair Bishop. Eventually, Anchor Point and the UPP stations are overrun with aliens, and Hicks must team up with the survivors to destroy the parasites. The film ends with a teaser for a fourth movie, where Bishop suggests to Hicks that humans are united against a common enemy, and they must track the aliens to their source and destroy them. It was at this point Brandywine was considering not having Weaver or the Ripley character return at all. They felt that because women failed to show up to watch Aliens, why not try a male lead, and why not make it Hicks? The screenplay was very action-oriented, featuring an extended cast, and is considered in some circles as a superior idea to what would become Alien 3, and has a considerable following on the internet. But the producers weren't satisfied with the screenplay. They thought it wasn't interesting, lacking the human element present in Aliens, and Gibson's trademark cyberpunk aesthetic. Gibson was asked to make rewrites with Harlan, but declined, citing various other commitments and foot-dragging on the producer's part. Following Gibson's departure, Harlan suggested screenwriter Eric Red, writer of the cult horror films The Hitcher and Near Dark. Red worked less than 2 months, delivering his draft in February 1989. He would later describe his Alien 3 work as the one script I completely disowned because it was not my script. It was the rushed product of too many story conferences and interference with no time to write, and turned out utter crap. His approach had a completely new set of characters and subplots, while also introducing new breeds of the alien. The plot opened with a team of Special Forces Marines boarding the Sulaco and finding that all survivors had fallen victim to the aliens. Afterwards, it moved into a small-town U.S. city in a type of biodome in space, culminating in an all-out battle with the townsfolk facing hordes of alien warriors. Brandywine rejected Red's script for deviating too much from their story, and eventually gave up on developing 2 sequels simultaneously. Writer David Toohey was next to work on the project, being instructed to start with Gibson's script. But once communism fell in 1989, it made the Cold War analogies outdated, so Toohey changed his setting to a prison planet, which was being used for illegal experiments on the aliens for a biological warfare division. Harlan felt this approach was too similar to the previous movies, and more guns and more aliens without bringing something new wasn't fair to the fans.
Can't get excited about the idea of just having more guns and more aliens.
He got tired of the development hell and left the project. Toohey's script was delivered to Fox president Joe Roth, who didn't like the idea of Ripley being removed, declaring that Sigourney Weaver is the centerpiece of the series, and Ripley was really the only female warrior we have in our movie mythology. Weaver was then called with a reported $4 million salary plus a share of the box office receipts. She also requested the story be suitably impressive, original, and non-dependent on guns, as she supported gun control. Toohey then wrote Ripley into his screenplay. But development hell continued for Alien 3, and when Hill attended a screening of The Navigator, A Medieval Odyssey, he was so moved by it, he decided to invite its director, Vincent Ward, into their planning. Ward, who was in London developing Map of the Human Heart, wasn't interested in making a sequel movie, but after the third time being called, agreed to give it a try.
I looked at the script they'd sent me. I didn't like it.
And instead worked up another idea, involving Ripley's escape pod crash landing on a monastery-like satellite.
And I pitched this story to them, and really to my surprise, because I just wanted to get out of Australia for a break, they really liked it.
Ward was hired to direct Alien 3, and Fox and Brandywine were really gearing up to make the movie this time.
They were really talking about making this movie.
Within a month of the meeting in 1990, the studio gave Alien 3 a release date of May 22, 1992. There was a feeling that the studio was more interested in setting out a release date than taking the time needed to make a movie that could properly follow up Alien and Aliens.
You're being adventurous about a story and exploring it.
Once Toohey discovered through a journalist friend that another script was being written concurrently with his, he left the project. Meanwhile, the production was moving forward at the Pinewood Studios in London. The crew was building sets on the large James Bond stage. Ward envisioned a planet whose interior was both wooden and archaic in design, where Luddite-like monks would take refuge. The story began with a monk who sees a star in the east, Ripley's escape pod, and at first believes this to be a good omen. Upon Ripley's arrival and increased hints of the alien presence, the monk inhabitants believe it to be some sort of religious trial for their misdemeanors, punishable by the creature that haunts them. By having a woman in their monastery, they wonder if their trial is partially caused by sexual temptation, as Ripley is the only woman to be amongst the all-male community in 10 years. To avoid this belief and hopefully the much grimmer reality of what she has brought with her, the monks of the wooden satellite lock Ripley into a dungeon-like sewer and ignore her advice on the true nature of the beast. The monks believe that the alien is now in fact the devil. Primarily, though, this story was about Ripley's own soul-searching, complicated by the seeding of the alien within her and further hampered by her largely solo attempts to defeat it. Eventually, Ripley decides to sacrifice herself to kill the alien. Fox asked for an alternative ending in which Ripley survived, but Weaver would only agree to do the film if Ripley died. But ultimately, these ideas didn't go over well with Brandywine or Fox. Brandywine brought up the logical problems of creating and maintaining a wooden planet in space, while Fox executive John Landau considered Ward's vision to be more on the
artsy-fartsy side than on the big commercial side
that Ridley Scott and James Cameron employed. Brandywine wanted the planet turned into an ore refinery and the monks into prisoners, and eventually Fox asked for a meeting with the director, imposing a list of changes to be made. The reality was, Fox wanted to keep churning out the money with Alien 3 and didn't want to take any risks, although it had been risk-taking that got Alien and Aliens made in the first place. The studio was so controlling, they hired Ward, an assistant, and a production designer, who Fox was calling daily for reports on exactly what he was doing.
You know, the assistant at the studio organized for you, and I went, yes, tall, beautiful. Gets phone calls every night from the studio behind your back.
Eventually, Ward said he'd rather be fired than make the changes the studio wanted, so they fired him.
Yeah, sure.
Even though he was fired, Alien 3's main plot would still follow Ward's basic structure. Short on time before filming was due to commence, Brandywine's Hill and Giler took control of the screenplay themselves, melding aspects of the Ward script with Toohey's earlier Prison Planet screenplay to create the basis of the final film.
And I don't know whether it had always been a Prison Planet or it turned into that.
Weaver also had a clause written into her contract stating the final draft should be written by Hill and Giler, believing they were the only writers besides James Cameron to write the character of Ripley effectively.
It's a hard character to write, Ripley. They're really the only ones.
Fox approached music video director David Fincher to replace Ward.
And he was incredibly impressive. One of the most extraordinary meetings I think I've ever had.
This was Fincher's movie directorial debut, as he had spent the previous 6 years directing music videos for Madonna, George Michael, and Aerosmith, among others. He also had experience working for George Lucas's Industrial Light and Magic, for Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, and Star Wars Return of the Jedi. But it wouldn't be a far reach to think they may have hired the Green Fincher so they could have better control of the film. But more on that later. While Weaver would leave her old cast behind, Lance Henriksen would have a small part in the movie. Michael Biehn was hurt and upset about being killed off-screen in a franchise he thought he would be continuing as Weaver's partner. So when he found out they were planning on using a body of his likeness in the third movie, he said absolutely not.
It's one thing not to be in it. It's another thing for me to have had that alien come back in me and have it come out of my chest with, blah, blah, blah.
They wanted to show his body with an alien bursting from his chest. he was still offended by being left out and said there was no amount of money he would take.
Okay, how much money you have, that alien is not coming out of my chest.
But when they asked if they could use his photograph, he said yes, and apparently it was for as nearly as much as he made for filming Aliens, which to this day is still undisclosed.
If I would have known David Fincher was going to be David Fincher, I probably would have said, well, you do whatever you want, David.
Newcomers to the Alien franchise who would play a big role in the third movie included Charles S. Dutton, who played Dylan. He would go on to be in more than 100 roles, including a memorable one in the movie Rudy. Charles Dance would play Ripley's first official on-screen love interest as Clemens. He would go on to act in more than 150 roles after Alien 3, most notably as Tywin Lannister in the Game of Thrones HBO series. Fincher loved the 1987 With Nail and Eye movie so much, he tried to cast all of them in Alien 3.
I'm a trained actor reduced to the status of a bum.
He would succeed in getting Paul McGann and Ralph Brown, although the studio passed on Richard Grant. Filming began on January 14, 1991. Most of the production was shot at Pinewood, with some scenes shot at Blythe Power Station and the beach near Dawden to show the exterior of the planet. There are two main themes that ran the undercurrent of filming for Alien 3. First is that they weren't operating from a finished script, and what they were shooting changed on a day-to-day basis. And second is that Fox micromanaged the production every day of filming.
Continually reworking the script to make up for a short pre-production.
The studio was so insensitive, they didn't even take into consideration that they were routinely calling Fincher at 3 a.m. when he was sleeping, and they would wake him requiring a breakdown of what he'd been shooting the day before.
It's amazing to me that Fox is #1 studio in the country because they're all such a bunch of morons.
Part of that may have been because while the sets were huge and gorgeous with 40 and 50 foot high constructions, the bulk of the money budgeted had been spent constructing them at the beginning, which gave the rest of the production very little flexibility. But unlike Cameron, Fincher had the complete trust and respect of the cast and crew.
David Fincher is a genius, basically.
Bad news came at the start when director of photography Jordan Cronenweth, who had collaborated with Alien director Ridley Scott on Blade Runner in 1982, was found to be suffering from Parkinson's disease, which started to affect his work. He was replaced 2 weeks into shooting by Alex Thompson, who had shot Scott's 1985 movie Legend. One of the most challenging parts of the shoot was filming the corridors when they were trying to trap the alien. It was shot with Steadicam, which was able to do a flip and give an upside-down shot from the POV of the creature, which had never been done before. It turned out to be one of the most interesting shots of the movie and won an MTV Movie Award. Fincher wanted the alien to be more of a puma or a beast as opposed to the upright humanoid posture of the previous films. So Giger generated new sketches for the idea. He included longer, thinner legs and a sharp alien tongue in place of the secondary jaws. Toward the end of filming, producers realized they had holes in the movie that still needed to be filmed. The studio's idea was to stop filming, bring the production back to Hollywood, and then assess what was needed before going back. They were going to give Fincher an opportunity to edit the movie and determine what he needed to finish. The initial cut was 3 hours when they showed it to Fox. The studio felt like some of the elements of the film were too much, including a longer autopsy scene of Newt and the alien dog burster scene. Those were ultimately edited down significantly. It's important to note Fincher originally wanted the alien to come out of an ox instead of a dog. The ending scene where Ripley falls into the molten ore to make sure the company didn't get the alien came into question when they learned the end of Terminator 2, although it wasn't out yet, had a similar type of ending. The studio wanted to shorten the movie significantly, so it would show more times in theaters each day. They ended up editing the film for over a year. The studio wanted fear and action, and Fincher wanted a movie with more meaning and soul. In the end, the studio got what it wanted. The studio cut out much of the initial establishing beach scenes that introduced the audience to the inmates, and it removed what set up the location and story that was about to happen. Another sequence that was removed was that they had captured the alien and a character named Golik, who was compelled by the creature, let it go free. All of these problems would resonate with audiences when it finally hit the big screen. Reshoots would push the budget from 45 to 65 million, more than double Alien and Aliens combined. The score was recorded during the Los Angeles riots of 1992, which Elliot Goldenthal later claimed contributed to the score's disturbing nature. Unlike Goldsmith and Horner before him, Goldenthal had a luxurious 7 months and constant access to the director to score Alien 3. His previous scores for Drugstore Cowboy and Pet Sematary were good, but this movie put him on the map. Goldenthal would also later compose for Interview with a Vampire and Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within. Alien 3 would release in the United States on May 22, 1992. It would debut at number 2 behind Lethal Weapon 3 with a Memorial Day weekend gross of $23.1 million. The film would be considered a disappointment in North America, only earning $55.5 million, but once released internationally, shot up to nearly $160 million. Based on that figure, it out-earned Alien, with Fox claiming it was the highest-grossing movie of the franchise. The only problem was, very few people liked it. Siskel and Ebert gave it 2 thumbs down, saying that it felt repetitious, exactly what many of the creatives felt like the studio was forcing. It's a shame that the fans of the Alien franchise will never know what the director of Seven, The Game, and Fight Club might have done if he could have done the movie the way he wanted to. Sigourney Weaver would say in 2024 that Fox was idiotic for not supporting Fincher's vision for Alien 3. While Cameron recognized how wonderfully shot Alien 3 was, he saw it as a slap in the face to fans who fell in love with and wanted to see more of the relationship between Ripley and Newt. "I understand the instinct, which is you have to make it your own," said Cameron. "I just don't think you should make it your own at the expense of what people like." Cameron had hoped Hicks, Ripley, and Newt would return back to Earth as a family in a 3rd installment.
He always kind of planned on Ripley, Hicks, and Newt going back to Earth and being a family.
Fincher would ultimately disown the film, stating the following: "I had to work on it for 2 years, got fired off it 3 times, and I had to fight for every single thing. No one hated it more than me. To this day, no one hates it more than me. The movie I set out to do, the one in my head, was so different from what got made. I got hired for a personal vision and was railroaded into something else. I didn't read a script for a year and a half after that. I thought I'd rather die of colon cancer than do another movie." He was not involved in the final cut, but his initial rough cut later became the basis for the assembly cut, a longer version of the movie released on DVD in 2003 and on Blu-ray in 2010. Although Fincher was asked to work on this assembly cut, he considered it but eventually decided against it, giving supervising producer Charles de la Zirica his blessing as long as it was not called a director's cut. Fincher would later say there could never be a version he would call a director's cut without starting over and creating the movie from scratch. On July 12, 2018, it was announced that William Gibson's unmade screenplay of Alien 3 would be adapted into a comic series. As part of Alien's 40th anniversary on May 30th, 2019, a full cast audio drama of William Gibson's unproduced screenplay of Alien 3 was released and made available on Audible, with both Michael Biehn and Lance Henriksen reprising their film roles. Both are based on the second draft. 2021 saw another adaptation of the screenplay, this time as a novel written by Pat Cadigan from Titan Books, and based instead on the first draft. Would the disaster production that was Alien 3 discourage the studio from doing it again? When George Saralagi was promoted to Senior VP of Production in June 1995, he had already made a name for himself by bringing 1994's Speed and 1995's Die Hard with a Vengeance to the studio and helped develop and supervise the productions. Alien had been the only movie he'd seen before getting into the movie business, and he loved it. So when he realized he worked at Fox and could make an Alien movie, he really wanted to do it. It took some convincing, but the studio agreed with his idea to clone Newt and bring her back to have an Alien the Next Generation. Newt would have the special skills that she demonstrated navigating undetected in Aliens, and Ripley's former employer would use her to track down the creatures for their own research. Neither Saralagi nor his bosses thought Weaver would want to come back, since it was her idea to kill off her character. The execs liked his idea and told him to go find a writer. Saralagi went to a guy he knew who was pretty good at taking a young woman and turning her into a butt kicker. He called Joss Whedon, who had not only written Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but had also helped punch up the script on his Speed movie. He had found the right guy because Whedon, who loved the Alien franchise, like Cameron, felt like the fans had been screwed over with Alien 3. So Whedon was incredibly excited and agreed to take on the project.
So I did. I wrote a treatment, and they said, "This is interesting. We'd like maybe to make this, but you have to put Sigourney Weaver in it."
He wrote a 35-page film treatment bringing back the character of Newt, and the executives at Fox were excited. But they were worried about the success of an Alien film without Weaver and her Ripley character. At first, Whedon hated the idea of scrapping the Newt concept, but as a longtime fan of the franchise, this was his chance to be involved, so he went back to the drawing board. He knew that if he was going to bring such a beloved character back to life and have the audience accept it, he needed the resurrection to feel real. So he matched the disbelief viewers would experience with her being back by having Ripley also struggle with being cloned. The idea for cloning had come from Brandywine's Hill and Geiler, who after reading the script opposed the production of Alien Resurrection as they thought it would ruin the franchise.
You know, we read their script and we thought, well, this is just going to ruin this franchise. This just doesn't work at all. They insisted on making it, and they went ahead and, you know.
Sigourney Weaver was sitting in a Fox exec's office when she found out they were writing a new script for Alien. One of the reasons she had wanted Ripley killed was to rescue her from constantly being woken up to deal with these creatures.
I was stunned, frankly, because one of the reasons I died was really to liberate this series, because I didn't want her to keep waking up, you know, oh my god, there's a monster.
Also, she'd heard they were going to do Alien vs. Predator.
That was just sounded awful.
So she wanted out. When they told her about the new script, they told her she'd find it provocative how she was being brought back. She was impressed with Whedon's script and thought the movie brought back the spirit of the first two movies. She would receive a co-producer credit and be paid $11 million to do the film. The first person approached to direct the film was Danny Boyle, who had made a name for himself making Trainspotting. But after meeting with effects supervisors to discuss the film, he decided to pass. Peter Jackson of Lord of the Rings fame was also approached, but declined as he could not get excited about making an Alien film. Bryan Singer had also been asked after making The Usual Suspects, but didn't want to make the movie either. When Jean-Pierre Jeunet was asked to direct, he also didn't think it was a good idea to make sequels.
And Dominique Pinault arrived, nobody to help him, you know. It was pretty dangerous, in fact.
The French director, who would require an interpreter because he didn't speak enough English to converse with an English-speaking film crew, had made a name for himself with The City of Lost Children. Based on that movie, execs thought he had what was needed to make another Alien movie visually stunning. And for the first time in 4 movies, Fox would have a director that was happily implementing whoever and whatever the studio wanted for the movie. Winona Ryder was brought in before Weaver or Jeunet had been secured, although the part had originally been offered to Angelina Jolie. Ryder had just finished The Crucible opposite Daniel Day-Lewis for Fox, and they wanted to meet with her. They asked her if she would be interested in doing a sci-fi movie. She said the only way she would do a sci-fi movie is if it were an Alien movie. She loved the movies growing up. When they told her they were working on a new one, Sarah Legge talked to her about the part of the android call.
They thought I was going to go, are you crazy? You know, but it was like the opposite. I mean, I love these kind of movies.
It was the first time in her life she agreed to do a film without reading a script. She didn't care if she died in the first scene. She just wanted to be able to tell her brother she was in an Alien movie. Ron Perlman had been in his first lead role with Jeunet's The City of Lost Children, and the director wanted him to play the brute Johnner in Resurrection. He had to fight for him as the studio wanted a more well-known actor, but the director got his way. Of course, Perlman is probably most famous for his portrayal of Hellboy in 2004. Other notable castings included Brad Dourif, who played Gediman, Dan Hedaya, who played General Perez, and J.E. Freeman, who played Dr. Wren. The Dr. Wren role had originally been written with Bill Murray in mind. Filming began at Fox Studios in Los Angeles in October 1996. After 3 films made in London, Weaver didn't want to travel and asked to do the film in the United States. The film script was laid out similar to a comic book with pictures on the left and dialogue on the right. Jeunet planned every shot, which made it easier for visual effects artists to do their work. Blue Sky Studios was hired to create the first CGI aliens to appear on film. Jeunet had been impressed with their work on Joe's apartment creating CGI cockroaches, so he hired them to create 30 to 40 shots of CGI aliens. The decision was made to use CGI aliens rather than puppets or suited actors whenever the creature's legs were in frame, as Jeunet felt that a man in a suit is easy to distinguish when the full body is in scene. One shot of the film that is now legendary was a suggestion from Weaver where she thought a great example for Ripley to show her new powers would be for her to throw a basketball through a hoop backwards. Jeunet wanted to use CGI or a machine to shoot the basketball so that it didn't take 200 shots, but Weaver was insistent that she make the shot herself. She trained for a month, but on the day of the shoot, the set built required her to make a much longer shot than she had practiced. To the shock of everyone, she made the shot on the first take, with Perlman nearly ruining the scene by breaking character when she made it. Luckily, they were able to edit around him.
And I'm watching it go in, and I went, ah! Like this.
The director wanted to have a scene where a mosquito bites Ripley, but then bursts into smoke because of her acid blood. But he dropped the idea when the special effects team told him how much it would cost. There was a huge underwater shoot on the film that several of the actors had to deal with. Weaver was claustrophobic, and Ryder had nearly drowned as a child and hadn't been underwater since. And Perlman nearly drowned. At one point, when trying to surface, he hit his head on a sprinkler in the ceiling, knocking him out cold. He was rescued by nearby film crew members.
They say action, and holy shit! There's an alien chasing me, and you're out of air.
In this movie, Ripley and the Queen that had been inside her are cloned. Ripley is part alien and part human, and the Queen is now part human, and delivers a human-alien hybrid that to this day has fans asking themselves how they feel about it due to its haunting and sorrowful face. The newborn creature Whedon originally scripted in Resurrection was drastically different to the one ultimately featured in the film. In the script, it is an eyeless, ivory-white creature with 6 limbs, 4 spider-like legs at the front, and with 2 dog-like rear limbs. It also has bulging red veins running along the sides of its elongated alien head and an inner jaw, with the addition of a pair of pinchers on the sides of its head. These pinchers were used to immobilize the creature's prey as it drained its victim of their blood using its inner jaw. The newborn was also meant to rival the Queen in size. But instead of going with what had been written, Jeunet asked Amalgamated Dynamics, who was making the creature, to lean towards making the human-alien hybrid more human than alien. The creature took 9 puppeteers to operate and has been described as one of the most complex animatronics ever created. Jeunet was adamant that the newborn have genitalia, a mix of both sexes. However, Fox was uncomfortable, and even Jeunet eventually felt, even for a Frenchman, it's too much.
It was outside to pee.
The genitalia were digitally removed in post-production. While impressed with the animatronic, Jeunet regretted that the creature was almost always seen from the waist up, with just one brief shot showing the creature standing in full view. Filming ended in February 1997 and was composed by John Frizzell, who would later do the music for Office Space.
Not gonna work here anymore anyway.
Alien Resurrection premiered in Paris on November 6, 1997, before opening in the United States on November 26th. Resurrection would debut at number 2 at the box office behind Robin Williams' Flubber. The movie would gross $47.8 million in North America and $161 million worldwide, and would only be the 43rd highest grossing film in the US for 1997. The movie came out with mostly mixed reviews, although Roger Ebert would later name it the worst film of 1997. Apparently, he didn't see Batman and Robin. Whedon was unhappy with everything about the film. He later commented in 2005, "It wasn't a question of doing everything differently, although they changed the ending. It was mostly a matter of doing everything wrong. They said the lines, but they said them all wrong. And they cast it wrong. And they designed it wrong. And they scored it wrong. And they did everything wrong they could possibly do." That's actually a fascinating lesson in filmmaking, because everything they did reflects back to the script or looks like something from it. And people assume that if I hated it, then they'd change the script. It wasn't so much that they changed it, they executed in a ghastly fashion that rendered it unwatchable. Whedon would take this lesson to push himself into the director's chair. He figured the only way he could protect his scripts was to also direct them.
That is what made me go, oh, this can be done and this should be done.
He would later direct the Buffy the Vampire TV series, Angel, Firefly, and 2 Marvel Avengers movies. In October 2022, Jeunet responded to a long-running feud with Whedon about Alien Resurrection by blasting him and the current genre of superhero movies by saying, "He's very good at making films for American geeks, something for morons, because he's very good at making Marvel films. I hate this kind of movie. It's so silly, so stupid." But with a lukewarm reception for Alien Resurrection, what would the studio do next with its financially successful franchise? After Alien Resurrection, Alien's writer-director James Cameron had been working on a story for a fifth Alien film. Ridley Scott had talked with Cameron saying, "I think it would be a lot of fun, but the most important thing is to get the story right." Scott's concept of the story was to go back and explain where the alien creatures were first found and how they were created. This, of course, would become the basis of Prometheus in 2012, but more on that later. And despite Weaver's attempts to thwart off the Alien and Predator crossover movies,
sounded awful,
she was unable to do so. When Cameron found out Fox's intention was to move forward with Alien vs. Predator, he believed the film would kill the validity of the franchise and ceased working on his story. He felt like Fox was now just milking their assets, and he stepped away for good. Though not considered canon in the official Alien franchise universe, we would be remiss not to talk about Alien vs. Predator for a few moments, as they are a part of the overall rich history of the property. The concept got its legs from the 1990 filmmakers of Predator 2, who incorporated an Easter egg in which an alien skull was seen in a Predator trophy case, which had been inspired by the Dark Horse comic series Aliens vs. Predator that began in 1989. Because 20th Century Fox owned both properties, they had time to let the idea of a crossover movie gestate. But popularity throughout the fandom was growing over the comic book series, and at some point, it would be too big to ignore. After a decade of failing to push forward a successful idea, Paul Anderson, who was famous for turning popular video games into movies like Mortal Kombat and Resident Evil, pitched an idea he had been working on for 9 years to Fox producer John Davis. Davis was impressed with the story and felt like it was like Jaws in how it just continued to draw you in. The story tied together Earth's ancient pyramid-building cultures,
three separate cultures that really have nothing to do with one another,
and set the scene deep below Antarctica, where the Predators were using a captured alien queen to create a rite of passage hunting scenario. Filming would begin in late 2003 in Prague, Czech Republic, where most of the filming took place. Lance Henriksen, who had played Bishop in Aliens and Alien 3, was brought back to keep the continuity of the series by including a familiar face. He would play billionaire Charles Bishop Wayland as the original CEO and founder of Wayland Industries. For the part of heroine Alexa Woods, Sanaa Lathan was selected. She had previously been in Blade and Love and Basketball. Arnold Schwarzenegger was planning to reprise his role as Major Alan Dutch Schaefer from Predator in a short cameo if he lost the 2003 recall election for California governor. As it would turn out, he won and became unavailable for the film. Alien vs. Predator was released on August 13, 2004 and grossed $80.3 million in North America and $177.4 million worldwide, with Deadline reporting the film was extremely profitable for the studio. At that time, it was the highest grossing film of both the Predator and Alien franchises. After the film, Cameron would say it was actually pretty good and ranked it third among the 5 Alien films after the original and his own. The success of the first movie would spawn a follow-up with Alien vs. Predator Requiem. The story would follow the events of the ending of the first movie, where the new Alien-Predator hybrid is loose on the Predator ship, the ship crash lands, and xenomorph activities ensue on an unsuspecting Colorado town. Unfortunately, it would seem that Fox was on a money grab for its second AVP movie, considering the first one would have a $70 million budget and Requiem would only get $40 million. But in order to spend so much less, they would need to lean on directors who didn't need as much money. So they hired brothers Colin and Greg Strauss, who were producing special effects for movies like Volcano, The Day After Tomorrow, and Poseidon. As for directing experience, that would come in the form of Nickelback music videos, and as it would turn out, they were no David Fincher. Filming began on September 23, 2006 in Vancouver, British Columbia for a very short 52-day schedule. While the brothers were shooting this movie, they were simultaneously supervising the visual effects for 300, Shooter, and Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. So it might be a little easier to understand why this movie was criticized for having an unfocused story. Other complaints included bad lighting and an alien that was too large and ungainly to be thought of as a stealthy threat. The film was released in the United States on December 25, 2007. The film came out with a hard R rating for gore and language, when the first film had been PG-13. It would still bring in a worldwide gross of $130 million, so the studio got its financial win. But you could put a stick in the AVP franchise, as it would be nominated for a Razzie for Worst Excuse for a Horror Movie. A tie-in video game released at the same time allowed players to take the role of the Predator from the film, but much like the movie, the game received negative reviews as well. If Alien vs. Predator was done, where would the Alien franchise and Fox go from here? A couple years after the dust from AVP Requiem settled, Ridley Scott started to show interest in the franchise he started. In May 2009, Fox announced that the new Alien project was a reboot of the franchise, but was soon changed to an untitled prequel to Alien. But development stopped in June when Fox fought with Scott over his selection of Carl Eric Rinch to direct. Fox was only interested in pursuing the project if Scott directed. By July, it was agreed, and John Spates was hired to write the script while he was developing other story ideas with Scott Free, Ridley's production company. Initially, Spates said, with everything that has been put up on the screen till now, I have no idea how to move this franchise forward. But he was told, you don't, because we're going back.
Well, you'd have to go back to the shipwreck from which it all sprang.
There were so many questions that needed to be answered, including who was the giant corpse sitting in the chair of the spacecraft during Alien? Later, fans would name him the Space Jockey. Spates really wanted to explore where those creatures came from and what did they have to do with the aliens. The writer also felt it was important to connect this giant race back to the history and evolution of humans. Fox loved where they were going with it so much they scheduled a release for December 2011. Which eventually had to be pushed back. Scott worked closely with Spates on the story, and after nearly a year, the script was completed in June 2010. The story would be an exploration of humanity's curiosity and a search for their maker, these engineers, to ask the simple question of, why? Why did you create us? Alongside that would be your standard Alien story, complete with all the things fans love about the franchise.
We thought about going back to Alien. And I said, Alien, back, well, and I sort of walked through the films in my head.
But while Scott was ready to go into pre-production, according to Spates, the studio wasn't prepared to move forward solely on an untested writer who had never had a movie produced. The studio wanted a second opinion. The incredibly popular TV show Lost had finished only a month earlier. It had been on the air for 6 years, and the show's writer and co-creator Damon Lindelof dropped off the face of the earth and spent a month with his family in Italy. When he returned, he had a few months before he was expected to start working on the next Star Trek movie with J.J. Abrams, so he put a signal out that he was open for some work. While he was driving down Ventura Boulevard near Los Angeles, he got a call from his agent and said Ridley Scott was about to call him. Lindelof was excited. He hoped it was about the new Alien prequel he'd been hearing about. Scott called him to let him know he was sending over a script and wanted to know what he thought. An hour later, Lindelof was reading the script in his home. He really liked it, but they were obviously giving it to him for a reason. He had no idea what they liked or didn't like about it, so he wrote Scott an email talking about the things he loved about it, but also the things he felt should be changed. He felt the original script was heavy on the alien stuff that everyone has seen now 5 or 6 times in different movies, including chest bursting and face hugging and xenomorphs.
Just essentially this very cool, in space no one can hear you scream, it's terrifying, but on a thematic level, it's kind of just is what it is.
Lindelof told him that the idea and characters in this script can be made so strong that you don't need any of the other stuff. Lindelof said he saw the movie as running parallel to the original Alien and not as a direct sequel to that movie, and then he told him how they could do that. Scott loved his approach and brought him into the project. Lindelof was aware that he was coming in to essentially rewrite someone else's script, so he shot an email to Spates letting him know he had done a great job on the script and he'd try to keep as much of it as possible. The two writers never had bad blood over the change, and in the end, they both got credit for the screenplay. Lindelof's vision, inspired by Blade Runner and Spates' script, would give Scott a very defined 3-act movie about the nature of creation on multiple layers. At this time, the Alien prequel was being called Paradise, named after the John Milton poem Paradise Lost. But Scott thought this would convey too much information about the film. Fox CEO Thomas Rothman would be the one to suggest Prometheus, who was one of the Greek Titan gods who stole fire from the Olympian gods and gave that fire to human beings. The title was confirmed in January 2011. The release for the movie would be moved to June 8, 2012. Just as Lindelof was beginning his draft of the script, Swedish actress Noomi Rapace was having a meeting with Scott and his producers. He had loved her portrayal of Lisbeth Salander in the Swedish film adaptations of the Millennium series and wanted to work with her. They talked about a couple of scripts including the Alien prequel, but he didn't offer her a part. He told her she should do something about her accent and working with a dialogue coach. So that's what she did. When she was just beginning filming for Sherlock Holmes, A Game of Shadows in October 2010, Scott told her he wanted her to play the lead Elizabeth Shaw in his next Alien movie. He saw her as both intelligent and physical, which is exactly what he wanted for Shaw. Other actresses who were up for the role included Anne Hathaway, Natalie Portman, Gemma Arterton, Carey Mulligan, and Abby Cornish. For the part of Shaw's love interest, Charlie Holloway, Scott was having trouble finding the right actor for the role. Then he ran into Logan Marshall Green, who was mostly a stage actor and had a small role in the M. Night Shyamalan movie Devil. Scott wanted an actor who could compete with Noomi on the same level of intelligence, and it had to be real. Scott was impressed with him and a reading he did over a transatlantic Skype call, and he got the role.
And I was like, oh, well, I die. That's too bad, but I still want to keep reading.
Charlize Theron had heard about the script and talked to Scott about it early on, and he wanted her for the role of Shaw, but she wasn't available to do it because she was about to start work on Mad Max Fury Road. But she was really interested in what he was doing, so when Fury Road got pushed, Scott brought Theron in to play the part of Meredith Vickers, the corporate employee with a hidden agenda. Once she was cast, she developed 3 new scenes with Scott to expand her character, which included physical action scenes. Other actresses considered for Vickers included Michelle Yeoh and Angelina Jolie.
There's either an alternative agenda or there's something.
Ridley felt that one of the best actors out there at that time was Michael Fassbender, and he wanted him for the role of David. The actor was making a name for himself in films like Inglourious Basterds and as Magneto in X-Men First Class. Fassbender read the script and agreed to do it. It became official in January 2011. Scott wanted him to play the character so that he never knew whether or not he was serious. He wanted the audience to be unsure about the android's motives. Fassbender avoided watching the android characters in the other movies when developing his character. He instead studied the replicants in Scott's 1982 Blade Runner with a focus on Sean Young's character Rachel, whose longing for a soul interested him. He also drew inspiration from HAL 9000 in 2001: A Space Odyssey. When Scott went looking for the CEO of the Weyland Corporation, he initially wanted Max von Sydow, but chose to go with Guy Pearce as he could play Weyland both as an elderly character and a younger man. Pearce had recently played King Edward VIII in The King's Speech. Scott was glad to have him as he felt he could play any role. Pearce would spend between 4 and 5 hours in the makeup chair to transform into the character. Other notable actors in the film included Idris Elba, Sean Harris, and Benedict Wong. Filming for Prometheus began on March 21, 2011 and lasted 82 days. The movie would have an estimated budget of between $120 and $130 million and was shot at Shepperton and Pinewood Studios in London, just as the first movie had been. The movie was shot on 8 sound stages, including the 007 stage. The alien world was shot in Iceland at the base of Hekla, an active volcano in the southern part of the country. Other shoot locations included Spain and Jordan. Scott felt that it was very important to include the original alien designer H.R. Giger in the production. He did a few drawings for Scott, but ultimately the shoot was just moving too quickly for Giger to have a larger active role in the production. For the design of the engineers, Scott wanted them to resemble Greco-Roman gods and instructed his designers to reference the Statue of Liberty, Michelangelo's David, and Elvis Presley. The 8-foot-tall humanoid engineers were created by applying bulky, full-body prosthetics to the actors, whose facial features were later digitally enhanced to preserve the godlike physical perfection. One of the most difficult shots was a key scene involving a large 3D hologram star map dubbed the Ore. It was inspired by the 1776 Joseph Wright painting A Philosopher Lecturing on the Ore, in which a scientist displays a mechanical planetarium by candlelight. The complex visual effect contained 80 to 100 million polygons and took several weeks to render as a single complete shot. For the scene where Vickers sets an infected Holloway on fire, Theron wielded a real flamethrower emitting actual fire. She was excited to perform the scene when reading the script, but began to have second thoughts upon realizing she'd actually be setting a stuntman on fire. She ultimately agreed to perform the stunt, but the shot of her appearing shocked while setting him on fire was her natural reaction. The shot was kept in the film because the filmmakers thought that the break in the character was a good reaction for the normally icy, emotionless Vickers. It was also important for Scott to keep the use of computer-generated imagery as low as possible. Monster effects like the Deacon and the Hammerpeed were done practically as much as possible, with CGI only for complicated shots that couldn't be done for real. The giant trilobite facehugger was a full-size model and used in a few shots, and it served as a reference for a computer-generated version that was used in other shots. All in all, Weta Digital and Moving Picture Company provided 1,300 CG shots for the movie, mainly for digital landscapes, space scenes, and adding textures and fluids to practical effects. During post-production, the location of the planet where the action takes place was changed. The film takes place in 2089 and 2093, so the bulk of the movie actually takes place 29 years before the events of Alien. The original screenplay clearly specified that the action was set on LV-426, the same planetoid from Alien and Aliens. The idea was actually kept throughout many script rewrites and even filming. Scott had originally wanted to shoot the scenes of the surface of the planet LV-426 in Wadi Rum in Jordan or in the Moroccan desert, but due to political unrest in the areas, this was moved to Iceland as we discussed earlier. Scott wanted to explain the contrast between LV-426's clear appearance in this film and the dark one in Alien by periodic electric storms and volcanic eruptions. Those seriously affected the visibility on the planet's surface in the original film. In the end, it was decided during post-production to change the planet to LV-223, a neighboring planetoid of LV-426 within the same system. So, both planets are actually neighbors. Mark Strettenfeld composed for the movie after working with Scott on 6 of his previous films, including Robin Hood and American Gangster. Recordings were done at Abbey Road Studios in London. He used an unusual technique to compose the score. He wrote out the sheet music backwards, so the orchestra played it backwards, and then he digitally flipped it, so you're hearing the score as written, but the backwards-sounding orchestra gives an unusual and unsettling sound. Scott concluded his work on the film in March 2012. An innovative viral campaign was used to promote the film, consisting of several videos depicting the near-future world from the film. The first was a fake TED Talk given by Peter Whalen, called The Peter Whalen Files TED Conference 2023. Later, 2 different versions of a commercial promoting the David 8 android were released, as well as a video message from Earth to the engineers. These viral videos were designed by Scott and Lindelof themselves, and were directed by Scott's son, Luke. Prometheus was released in the UK on June 1, 2012, and in North America on June 8th. It was simultaneously released in IMAX theaters and 3D. The movie would end up earning $403 million worldwide, making it the 18th highest grossing film of 2012, and the highest grossing film of the Alien franchise. Prometheus is ultimately a cautionary tale about playing God. Reviews frequently praised both the film's aesthetic design and Fassbender's performance as David. However, the plot drew mixed responses from critics who felt plot elements remained unresolved or were predictable. James Cameron said, "I enjoyed Prometheus. I thought it was great. I thought it was Ridley returning to science fiction with gusto, with great tactical performance, beautiful photography, great native 3D. There might have been a few things I would have done differently, but that's not the point. You could say that about any movie." However, despite his praise, he also said he thought it didn't add up logically. And a lot of fans would agree. What exactly was the black goo? Or why did the engineers want to destroy humanity? The film posed many questions that are never answered, which is something Scott actually wanted. While some people can appreciate the thought-provoking aspect of the film, other fans wanted more answers.
May I ask you a question, Father? If you created me, who created you?
Scott had already been hinting at a sequel to Prometheus before the movie had hit theaters. Its early title was Alien Paradise. His plan was for the next movie to follow Shaw to her next destination because if it is paradise, it can't be what you think it is. Paradise has a connotation of being extremely sinister and ominous, he said. Lindoff cast doubt on his own participation, saying, if Scott wants me to be involved in something, that would be hard to say no to. But at the same time, I do feel the movie might benefit from a fresh voice, or a fresh take, or a fresh thought.
Oh, it's nice to be here again, but at the same time, I hope that there's enough originality in the movie.
So only 2 months after Prometheus hit the big screen, Fox was already pursuing a sequel with Scott, Rapace, and Fassbender involved, and talking to new writers in the event Lindelof didn't return. 4 months later, Lindelof would pass on the next project. Scott had said that the film would feature no aliens, as he wanted to phase out the monster to focus on David 8, whose AI was a new life form. The beast is done, cooked, he'd told Yahoo Movies in 2014. But after collecting feedback from Prometheus that the fans were frustrated not getting to see the original monster, he said, wow, okay, I'm wrong. It's a rare director that would admit that. Scott would go on to say the fans are not the final word, but they are the reflection of your doubts about something. I think you're not sensible if you don't actually take the fans' reaction into account. We would agree. The initial screenplay was difficult to nail down and went through several writers. It would eventually fall to John Logan in late 2014, who had previously worked with Scott on Gladiator. Logan said his goal was to write something that had the feel of the original Alien movie. He wanted to write a horror movie, so his goal was to recapture Alien with Covenant while also paying homage to the deeper implications of Prometheus. In August 2015, it was announced that the film would star Rapace and Fassbender. That December, Catherine Waterston was cast in the lead role of Daniels. Waterston had previously been in the film Steve Jobs with Fassbender. Summer Glau, Carolyn Murphy, and Alice Eve were also being considered for the part. In 2016, Scott changed his mind about the character of Shaw, and Rapace was out of the film. Although in June, she shot a week's worth of scenes that didn't go into the movie, but they were released for an online-only prologue that Fox put out on YouTube before Covenant's release. The initial script had Shaw hiding from David in the catacombs beneath the alien city, and when the newcomers show up, she helps them escape. But creature designer Carlos Huantes would later say that the script changed and he felt that it was the studio's call as to why she didn't return. But he didn't have a reason why. One could speculate they didn't want to have competing leading ladies on the film, and it would save them money in the casting department. But that is just conjecture. In February 2016, Danny McBride, Jussie Smollett, Billy Crudup, and other cast members were brought on board. Fassbender would end up playing David and a new version android named Walter. Some fans have wondered why Scott didn't name his fifth android with the letter E, since the first four names were the first four letters of the alphabet. Well, the secret of the alphabetical names is solved. Ash was the name given in the Alien script, so Scott kept it. Cameron liked the name Bishop, but he wasn't looking for a B name per se. Whedon likely named Call with a C to keep the streak going. But that has never been confirmed. But Scott had no intention of continuing the trend. He shared in a 2017 interview with Digital Spy that David is merely a coincidence, as the character was named for David Geiler, the longtime Alien producer at Brandywine. And that's right, Walter in Covenant is for Walter Hill, also from Brandywine. Scott did it to honor his longtime collaborators, who had a huge hand in shaping the franchise. Filming began on April 4, 2016 at Milford Sound in Fiordland National Park, New Zealand. Some footage was also filmed at Leavesden Studios in England. Effects houses Odd Studios and Creature NFX provided the film's makeup and animatronic creature effects respectively. When the crew of the Covenant make it to Planet 4, they come face to face with a new creature called neomorphs. The neomorphs' physiology and body structure was inspired by the real-world bodily autonomy of the goblin shark. Its teeth are able to come forward when attacking prey to do more damage by pointing directly out, allowing for a better grip. Filming wrapped on July 19, 2016 and went into post-production. In December 2016, it was announced James Franco had been cast in the role of Captain Branson, husband to Daniels and captain of the Covenant, but the role was limited to a cameo appearance of the deceased captain. The first cut of the film was 2 hours and 23 minutes long, which was eventually cut down to 2 hours and 3 minutes for the released version. Scott used test screenings to decide what to cut. In the run-up to the film's release, Fox put out a number of short prologue films as part of the marketing. A scene establishing the crew of the Covenant going into cryosleep was released as a prologue webisode titled Alien Covenant Prologue Last Supper. Though it was not included in the theatrical cut, footage from the scene is prominently featured in the theatrical trailer, and the full scene is found among the special features on the Blu-ray edition. Also, the crossing was the explanation of what happened to Elizabeth Shaw that we had mentioned earlier. And finally, a short called Meet Walter starring Fassbender and directed by Luke Scott was a fictional advertisement for the Walter series of androids. Alien Covenant premiered on May 4th, 2017 in London and on May 19th in the United States. The version released in China on June 16th was 6 minutes shorter than the versions elsewhere due to censorship from the country that removed a scene between the two characters played by Fassbender kissing. Alien Covenant grossed nearly $241 million worldwide and was considered a box office disappointment compared to Prometheus, which had made over $400 million. The movie did receive overall positive reviews from critics, but it would ultimately not be enough to create interest in a third prequel right away. The timeline gap is closing as Alien Covenant begins on December 5th, 2104 and ends a few weeks later in 2105. This is 17 years prior to Alien in the 1979 movie, which takes place in 2122. In 2015, writer-director Neil Blomkamp, who had directed District 9 and was coming off directing Chappie with Sigourney Weaver, announced plans to make an official fifth Alien movie, based on ideas and artwork that he had developed himself. The film would follow Aliens, thereby ignoring Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection. The film was officially to be produced by Scott while he was making Alien Covenant, and Sigourney Weaver and Michael Biehn were slated to reprise their roles as Ripley and Hicks. However, Blomkamp was then asked to delay his Alien project until Alien Covenant was released. Scott later claimed that the studio had canceled the project altogether, which had reportedly never developed beyond a 10-page story treatment. Although Blomkamp stated that the project was officially dead and he had moved on to other projects, Aliens director James Cameron said that he loved Blomkamp's idea, hoping to work with him on it in the future. On November 27, 2015, Scott announced that these current Alien films were part of a new Alien trilogy that would take place closer to and lead up to the original Alien film. He later suggested that there may even be a fourth prequel film. However, the future of the series became uncertain after the announcement that Disney was buying 20th Century Fox in December 2017. The next film in the series, tentatively titled Alien Awakening, that would come out after Covenant, was set to enter pre-production that same month. But according to some sources, the project was shelved indefinitely. The commercial underperformance of Alien Covenant, as well as its lukewarm reception by critics and fans, were named as reasons, although no official statements were made by Disney. In early 2019, however, the script called Alien Awakening was actively being written, and an untitled Alien prequel was officially in production as of 2022. An untitled prequel, huh? Surely that would be a Ridley Scott movie. When Fede Álvarez was 12 years old in 1990, he pressed play on a Destiny-shaped VHS tape. The movie was Alien, and it would have a profound effect on his life. The Uruguayan boy would grow up to be a filmmaker, and he would become very good at making horror, starting with the 2013 Evil Dead remake and then Don't Breathe in 2016. Right after Don't Breathe, Álvarez had a meeting with Scott Free while they were working on Alien Covenant. He was asked, if you could do any picture you wanted to do, what would it be? And he quickly told them, Alien. It's the one he's always wanted to do, no questions asked. Ridley and his team were intrigued by what Álvarez wanted to see in a movie as a fan. They weren't asking him to pitch a movie, but he found himself doing it anyways. Nothing came of it, but when the actual purchase of 20th Century Fox by Disney took place on March 20th, 2019, there was suddenly a lot of interest in Alien again. Disney spent a lot to buy Fox, and they wanted to start getting their money back right away. Álvarez got a call from Steve Asbell, president of production of 20th Century under Disney, and asked him if it's true that he once pitched an Alien movie to Ridley Scott. After giving him the pitch, including the importance of the relationship between Rain and her android brother Andy, Asbell asked him if he wanted to write and direct it. He certainly did. He would be the first person to write and direct an Alien movie since Cameron had done it with Aliens. Álvarez's first instinct was to try something different than had been done before. He wanted young people who weren't professionals and didn't really know what they were doing. He was watching an extended cut of Aliens when there was a bunch of children running around the corridors in the colony. He thought, what would it be like for those kids when they turned 20 living in that environment? So that became the focus of Alien Romulus. While Álvarez was just beginning work on his movie before he even had a script, he had a 2-hour Zoom call with James Cameron about Aliens. Cameron was working on Avatar 2 and relished the idea of having a horror thriller brainstorming session about Alien. With Álvarez feeling armed with information, he set out to create a story. His first intention was to merge his movie with the 2 prequels Scott had just made to try and merge them and create a conclusion somehow. He never liked the idea that Scott's movies were suspended and never got a conclusion. But he also felt that the later sequels had gotten too far away from what Alien originally was. So he decided he wanted to get back to the pure horror of Alien mixed in with the action of Aliens. So that is why it is set in the middle of the timeline between those 2 movies. It would be set in 2142, 20 years after Alien and 37 years before Aliens. Álvarez stuck to the established canon of the franchise as much as possible, even using the fan wiki Xenopedia as a reference point when writing the story. The film features connections and references to all of the 6 prior Alien films. In particular, the film ties directly to Alien, with Weyland-Yutani recovering the alien that attacked Ellen Ripley from the Nostromo. It also included an android named Rook, who would physically resemble the android Ash from the first film. The black goo from the 2 prequel films gives birth to a xenomorph hybrid resembling an engineer and the creature from the ending of Resurrection. The film would also draw inspiration from the video game Alien Isolation in 2014 by integrating the emergency phone registration points from the game that functioned as save points. These Easter eggs would foreshadow impending danger for the audience. In November 2022, Kaylee Spaney went into negotiations to star in the film as Rain. But she never had anything to worry about. Álvarez wrote the character with Spaney in mind. She'd been in Pacific Rim Uprising and Vice, and Álvarez loved her acting. In March 2023, Isabella Merced, best known as the live-action Dora the Explorer, as well as from the movie Transformers Last Night, joined to co-star as Kay. Later that month, David Johnson would be brought in to play the android Andy. Archie Renau, Spike Fern, and Eileen Wu would also join the cast. Filming began in Budapest on March 9, 2023. Production designer Nauman Marshall aimed to reinterpret the alien world while honoring the first 2 films in the series. As a result, the Romulus section of the Renaissance space station was designed to be reminiscent of the set design on Alien, which was influenced by the original concept art by Ron Cobb. The movie was shot chronologically and emphasized practical effects, as Álvarez says you just can't make up the actual interaction actors have with the things they see. So the production alternated between using animatronics, rod puppets, or creature suits, unless there was a need for multiple creatures, and then they would use CGI. When it came to creating an android on the station, Álvarez knew they were going to build an animatronic. It was going to be a real robot. He didn't want to put a person through the desk pretending they're half a person. So once he made that decision, the android could have any likeness they could think of. So he and Ridley together came up with the idea that it should be from the same assembly line as Ash from the first film. Lance Henriksen played Bishop in different movies, and even Michael Fassbender did it twice. Álvarez thought it was crazy that Ian Holm, the best of them all, never made another appearance.
In the world of Alien, you've seen some likeness being repeated many times.
Scott had really been close with Ian, and even though he had passed away in 2020, believed he would be on board.
Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Science Officer Rook, and I humbly request your services now.
Álvarez called his widow and the estate and pitched them the idea, making sure that she talked with all the kids and that everybody was fine with his plan. She told Álvarez that Ian was given the cold shoulder by Hollywood in the last 10 years of his life, and he would have loved to get that call, to get invited back to Alien, because he loved that character and he loved the franchise. Then they just had to figure out how to do it. They found a head cast of Ian from 1999's The Lord of the Rings, and that's how they were able to start putting it together. The family was always close during the process. They were the first ones to see it. Daniel Betts performed the lines and worked with the actors on set. The lines and the facial performance were translated into the animatronic and the CG part of it as well. It was an undertaking for the crew, but having Holm back as the android Rook really gave the film the alien flavor they were looking for. Some other interesting things Álvarez did to tie this movie to others included Andy, being an old and outdated synthetic model, has a malfunction that causes his fingers to twitch. In Aliens, Bishop said that older model synthetics were often a bit twitchy. Also, Rain is seen wearing the Reebok alien stompers that Ripley wears in Aliens. And in one scene, the crew members appear to be drinking Aspen beer. This is the same brand which the crew of the Nostromo drank in the original Alien movie. It is made by the Weyland-Yutani Corporation. Alien Romulus was originally supposed to be released direct to Hulu, but it was switched to a theatrical release in June 2023. The film premiered in Los Angeles on August 12, 2024, and would earn more than $350 million worldwide. The movie opened at #1 in the box office, dethroning Deadpool and Wolverine after it held the top spot for 3 weeks. This marked the second time an Alien film toppled a Marvel film at the box office after Alien Covenant beat Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. The movie would garner mostly good reviews with an 80% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes, including an 85% verified moviegoer rating. Overall, it was believed that Romulus honored its nightmarish predecessors while injecting some fresh acid blood into the franchise. Both Scott, who produced Romulus, and Cameron, who helped with the story ideas, were very happy with the outcome of Álvarez's film. Thanks to Disney's purchase of 20th Century Fox, the near future of the Alien franchise is going to see quite a bit of content. The mouse doesn't waste any time trying to capitalize on their purchases. After they bought Star Wars, they put out 5 movies in 5 years. Alien won't likely get the same treatment, but there are a couple of things you can count on for sure. If you were disappointed that Prometheus and Covenant didn't get a conclusion, in October 2024, Scott told The Hollywood Reporter he was working on a new Alien movie. Scott has already hinted that the new Alien movie can finish his prequel trilogy. During the interview, he said that between Covenant and Romulus, Covenant is the best one for a sequel because it leaves off with Daniels in the cryopod, David with alien eggs, and 2,000 colonists hanging around. It's a perfect beginning. If work began on that soon, there could be a release in late 2026 or early 2027. A Romulus sequel would likely follow with Rain and Andy in 2028 or 2029. But there is no need to wait for those movies to come out for new, fresh Alien franchise content, as Alien Earth, the TV show, begins airing on FX and Hulu in the summer 2025. The series will tie into the style of the original Alien movie. When a mysterious space vessel crash lands on Earth, a young woman and a ragtag group of tactical soldiers make a fateful discovery that puts them face to face with the planet's greatest threat. Noah Hawley, who also made Fargo, is the showrunner, writer, and director. Filming ended in July 2024. Hawley said he was going to give Alien fans something special, and he's very happy with what he shot. The Alien franchise has accomplished a lot now in more than 45 years, and it doesn't appear to be slowing down in the years ahead. In the end, it appears what started as a big-budget B-movie with aspirations would launch one of the biggest science fiction franchises of all time. But what do you think? Where does the Alien franchise rank among your favorites? What is your favorite movie, and which one do you like least? Share with us your favorite moments and stories from the franchise in the comments below. We'd love to talk with you about it. Also, this video was originally the final part of a larger video called The Definitive History of the Alien Franchise, but YouTube's complicated algorithm wouldn't allow us to release it all as one video. If you haven't already seen the first 2 parts, Alien and Aliens, and would like to, a link to them is about to pop up right now. If you enjoyed this definitive history and would like to hear the behind-the-scenes stories of how we made it, and perhaps some of the things we left out, just click on the join button and become a member of the channel, where we host a live interactive show after each release. And once again, thank you for supporting the channel. We couldn't do this without you. A link is about to pop up that will take you directly to these limited collector's edition designs. Every dollar earned goes toward making our next video. Don't forget to get a nice discount by using coupon code THEPOPCAST at checkout. Until next time.